So we've all heard the phrase, that's their cross to bear. And it's often thrown around to express that someone is having a painful or difficult experience. It's a phrase that strikes me as a little individualistic. That's their cross to bear, that's your cross to bear, as if struggle and pain are things that we must endure alone, as if we have no responsibility to ease the burdens and pain of others. After all, that's your cross to bear, not my cross, not our cross. It's your cross. When we look to the Gospels, we see Jesus telling his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Now, it's hard to understand what these words mean. They've been used and understood and exploited in many ways over the centuries. Deny yourself, take up your cross. But in order to understand them, we must know that they come immediately after Jesus has talked about his own impending suffering and death, the path he will walk and the spirit in which he does it. And that Jesus has these two crucial words in this sentence, which are, follow me. And so we are asked to look to Jesus' own path as a model for ours. The cross is not about some misfortune that happens to us or some random pain that we go through, but it's a choice to sacrifice and endure, to pour something of ourselves out for the sake of others, out of love for others. Jesus does not leave each one of us to our own struggles and burdens, but as he takes up his cross, he is taking up a burden that ultimately does not belong to him. The suffering he experiences is not for the sake of suffering, but a pain he is willing to endure for the sake of pouring out his love for the sake of others. As Paul writes to the Philippians, Christ was equal to God, but he did not rest in or exploit that glory or privilege, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. And he was obedient to God's love, even to the point of death on a cross. The crucifixion is not some handy transaction that was just tacked on to the end of Jesus' life, but it's the culmination of that life. It's the climax of everything that he did and how he did it. Jesus died as he lived and lived as he died, giving of himself out of love for others, putting himself in a position that he didn't have to be in, but he chose to draw near to the suffering and anguish and alienation of others and took it on as his own. And he could do this because he trusted in the faithfulness of God's love to be with him and to prevail for him through the darkest moments. In anticipation of that climax, of that moment of truth, of a life committed to giving of self for the sake of others, Jesus asks his followers to trust him, to trust the path that he is walking, to go and do likewise. That is to take up the cross. To live for the sake of others can seem like a kind of death. It makes sense that Jesus describes this path that he's on as losing one's life. He follows it with saying, for those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. We are very oriented towards saving our own life. We're often fearfully oriented around how we may protect and preserve our lives, constantly probing for potential threats, desperate to preserve life as we know it. And that's the problem. It's only life as we've come to know it, as we've come to accept it. But is it the life God intends? Are we holding on and embracing the life Jesus describes when he says, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly? Or are we clinging to something less alive, less true, just because it's familiar and known to us? When we cling to our identity and life as we know it, well, this is just who I am, this is my life, it's always good to maybe exercise a bit of skepticism. Well, is this who I am? Is this truly the life for which I was made? Because our life is not our own. We have a Creator who's created us with purpose, and we have a Savior who has also delivered us that we may know life and know it abundantly. Is the life that we've come to accept, is the life that we are so desperate to preserve, is the identity that we refuse to bend? Is it fear and suspicion that have shaped us and then convinced us to accept what we know? The thing is that the same walls that we set up defensively to keep out the threats that we perceive are the same walls that also separate us from what makes true life. They separate us from gratitude, growth, joy, and each other. Friends, survival is not a Christian virtue, and we were made for more than self-preservation. As we follow our Savior who lived and died for the sake of others and bids us to take up our cross and follow Him, let us remember that although we may be losing, even dying to the life we've always known, we are being invited to reclaim the life for which we were created and for which we were saved. One that is not self-serving or self-saving or self-preserving, but one in which we were created for God and each other. It is a life that requires a degree of openness and vulnerability. We were not made to struggle in isolation. We were not made to bunker down and cling to what we've known and scraping out whatever we can for ourselves, but to lift one another up as we pursue peace, justice, and reconciliation for all of God's children. And just as Jesus carried a cross intended for someone else, intended for us, the cross we are called to carry more than likely has someone else's name on it. That we are called to lift up the cross of those who are isolated, who are struggling with disease and injury, or enduring oppression, violence, and injustice. By dying to the old life and old ways of self-preservation, may we rise up to discover life and life abundantly. One in which we no longer live for ourselves, but live for one another, so that all of God's children may discover that beloved community where all joys and all burdens are shared and mutually carried. One in which we discover that none of us are alone in the struggles of this life. It may feel like losing our life. It may feel like we are giving up so much. But the more that we explore, the more in which we practice this, and the more we apply it into our own lives, it sounds a lot like finding our life. It sounds like a lot more than we've come to expect. May we live into hope that the same one who bids us to take up our cross and follow Him is the same one who promises that in losing our life as we know it, we may come to discover our life as we were made to live it.